it's a bit like an open prison. You voluntarily check yourself into. You have electronic tags, otherwise, which are the phones, because the whips are texting you like, "Are you on the estate? You can leave now. Please go and vote." It's no different. It's like a Category D open prison, but you voluntarily check yourself into, and then you have Stockholm syndrome because you can't get out of it. So I've finally broken that Stockholm syndrome.
Robert Henry Halfon, welcome to your exit interview, a chance for us both to learn what you could have done better. You're now one of, more than 100 MPs have announced they're standing down. You've been the MP for Harlow since 2010. So why are you leaving?
Well, I wanted to be an MP from the age of 10 because an MP came to my school and said that the Houses of Parliament had over 1,000 rooms. I literally demanded to go and see every single one of those rooms. Genuinely true.
At the age of 10?
At the age of 10. And I was taken to Parliament and I just thought, oh my God, it's the most incredible place I've ever seen in my life. I didn't get to see 1,000 rooms. I still haven't seen all the 1,000 rooms as it happens.
Some of them will be really grim.
Yeah, and I still don't know my way around because it's a maze. But I loved it. And I just thought, right, I'm going to be an MP. So I decided at the age of 10, I'm going to be an MP. And it took me 30 years because Gordon Brown delayed the election. From when it was ever going to be to 2010, everyone thought it was going to be 2008, I think. But having said that, I've done 6 elections. I lost one by 97 votes in 2005. It's a wonderful place. I love Harlow. I live there, genuinely live there. But 25 years, both being a candidate and being MP, is a long slog. And I want to try and still do something in public life, but not in Parliament.
Why did you want to be an MP at the age of 10? It presumably wasn't because you'd already decided, I'm a Tory, I'm not Labour, I'm not left or right. Was it about public service? Was it just about the fancy building?
A couple of things that happened to me. So first of all, the building, you can't always explain things. Why did you always want to be a journalist? You can't explain it. But I don't like to go on about this, but I was born with a form of cerebral palsy called spastic diplegia, and I was never able to walk. In fact, I walked on tiptoes when I was a child, so I could have been in Covent Garden, maybe, ballet. In fact, I had an operation from a famous doctor from Denmark who used to operate on ballet dancers, as it happens. But I was told that I wouldn't be able to do much with my life. Attitudes were quite different at that time to this kind of thing. And then my father found an amazing professor at Great Ormond Street Hospital that I owe in many ways, my life to. It sounds strange, and who started a series of a number of operations I had right up from the age of 6 to adult life. And I felt that I wanted to do something which was about public service. Because when you're an MP, you look after your area. You don't just vote on the laws, but you have to look after your area, your constituency. And it was a way of me doing something because I had been given an incredible opportunity. And so that was one of the reasons. I did love politics as well, because when you're going back to hospital, I was in hospital long periods of time. I did actually write about it once, but one thing you won't know is that Nadine Dorris was once a nurse in a hospital I was in North London. And I like to say she's the only MP who's seen me in my birthday suit. But because I was there for many months.
How was her bedside manner?
I was very small at the time. But I was there for a long, long time because I'd been transferred from a hospital in Sheffield to this place for a few months. And what could you do all day? It was pre-internet age, and so of course I started reading loads of newspapers, and I got into them more and more and more and more. And I used to have so many in my room. I used to cut out all the articles that my father said the room was a fire hazard, literally. And then I would walk around because I lean on the walls. The walls were covered with newspaper print all over our house.
Because she was all over your hands. And then
Because in those days, the print came off.
Yeah, all came off, yeah.
And I used to love going, and then it was like, I just read the news, watched the news, and then I loved going on a Saturday night. This sounds really sad. Most people go out on Saturday night and have fun. Couldn't wait till Saturday night till the papers came out at 10 o'clock.
When I first moved to London, that was the most exciting thing. You were out on a Saturday night and you get the Sunday papers. It was like you were time traveling.
And at that time, even I've lived all in different places, but you could go to King's Cross or go to Victoria, where I often went, and you could buy all the newspapers. And it was an amazing, exciting feeling taking them home. Now it's really sad. You just turn on your phone and look at it.
It's not the same. And when you said you don't like to talk about it, you want to bang on about it, how important was it for you to be the Tory MP Rob Halfon and not the disabled MP?
Well, this is why I've only started talking about it recently when people have asked me because I'm going, but I was absolutely very clear in my own mind from the beginning. I hardly ever mentioned it unless I was asked to by journalists, because I wanted to be known as Robert Halfon MP who champions apprenticeships, or Rob Halfon the MP who campaigns for lower fuel duty or campaigns for Harlow, whatever it may be. Because otherwise you just then get typecast. And this may sound strange. Of course, people with disabilities need to help other people, but it's often more beneficial if someone who doesn't have a disability who then campaigns and supports people. And I never wanted to be... You can so easily. Like I remember one person at the time from Downing Street saying, would you like to be the Minister for the Disabled? Or very tentatively. It was just some policy advisor. It wasn't like a...
Yeah.
This was some years ago, and I said, no, absolutely not. I want to go in Apprenticeships and Skills because you're putting me in there for the wrong reasons. I was even told by one person that it would be a good position to accept just to get into government, and then you could move around. I said, no way.
Because you'd probably never get out of it.
You'd never get out of it, but then why? I want to be there because of merit, not because... I've never believed in positive discrimination. I believe in ladder of opportunity, a level playing field. Everyone gets up that ladder, but no way do I believe in positive discrimination.
You mentioned fuel duty. One thing you were described as, because of your campaign against successive chancellors to stop fuel duty going up, you were described, I think it was by George Osborne, by the most...
and Cameron.
By the most expensive backbencher in Britain.
Yeah. Yes, just to be clear to your listeners, this is not because of IPSA and the MP's expense, but I realised my constituency when I was early on as a backbencher, this was at the time, people forget how high the cost of petrol and diesel was, that it was the number one issue. I'd asked the local McDonald's why they were charging people to park for more than an hour, and they said because people were parking overnight, because they're sleeping in their cars overnight, because they couldn't afford to drive, back home because of the price of petrol and diesel. And so I started this campaign with Fair Fuel UK, with the Sun newspaper, which was incredible on it. We did petitions. We got 100,000 people to sign a petition within a week. We did debates. We did a car going up all the way Whitehall. But the great thing was that everyone else was pushing it. I was just sitting on the front from one end of Whitehall to the other. It was very funny. Everything that was possible to do, we did it. And to be fair to the government, they froze duty, cut fuel duty, froze it, and then even Rishi cut it by 5p as well. So it was a great campaign, and it was really important because it affected everything, not just motorists, but the price of food. It affected public services because they were paying more for fuel. I think it's something I'm very proud of.
It's interesting because I remember, particularly when you started that campaign in the early days, I don't know what I've been doing then, sort of maybe Independent on Sunday, then Mail Online. And people were a bit sniffy about it. The sort of the Westminster, and I quite often sort of bridle a bit when people talk about the Westminster bubble because, most MPs have got constituencies. But because nobody in London drives, or most people in London don't drive, I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that if you don't live in London, the price of petrol you drive past every day is such a massive, not just the actual amount of money, it's just a totemic thing about how the cost of living changes on an almost daily basis. Yeah,
so the problem is if you live in a city, let's say like London or other cities, you've either got a train, a tram, bus network. If you, a place like my town, of course we have bus and a train to London, but so many people have vans that they go to work in or because they have different jobs, and it affects everyone in every walk of life. It even affected the price. When people say, I take a bus, I said, why do you think the bus prices have gone up? Because the cost of diesel has gone up. And so people just didn't understand it. Often people in London, they cycle to work. They've got cycle lanes, or they just get on a tube and just people just did not understand it. And at the time, if you remember, it was every single budget, fuel duty went up. Doesn't matter what government there was, Tory, Labour, whatever. And it now has become a totemic tax that's almost impossible to raise. And it'd be interesting to see what will happen in future years. But I think now people just understand that it was crazy. It's still 60% of your cost is on tax. It was, and has a huge impact on the cost of living. But to me, it was one of the number one indicators.
So, having been this rebellious, attention-seeking, troublemaking backbencher, how did you then feel becoming a minister, like you said, with apprenticeships and skills?
Yeah, I'd done that for 4 years. Then Osborne made me his PPS, and I'm a great admirer of George Osborne. I always say, we're called PPSs, Parliament Private Sector, called bag carriers. But because of my walking, he often helped me carry my briefcase. So I say I'm the first PPS in history that the Secretary of State carried the bags of the PPS. But it was an amazing year. It was very hard because it's funny to see Ed Balls and George Osborne do this podcast together. But at the time, it was really tough because it was in the run-up to the 2015 election. Things were looking difficult for us guys. Ed Balls was a pretty smart political operator. Every 5 minutes there were debates in Parliament, there were urgent questions, goodness knows what, and you always had to get the people there. And but I learnt a lot from him, and I admire him to this day. And I think that he will be regarded, this may sound crazy to some of your listeners, but one of the great chancellors, given that we had austerity to deal with and all kinds of things in history. And then he put me in attending cabinet as deputy chair. That was before I became apprenticeship minister, which was an unbelievable year that I'll never forget because it was the referendum year. And just the history of it, when Cameron went round the table on the, I think it was on the Saturday.
When he got his deal in Brussels and then came back and had a special cabinet
and we had
meeting.
a special cabinet meeting on a Saturday, and we all had to go round the table. And I was torn. I did vote Remain. I was a reluctant Remainer, but my heart was to leave. My head said to stay. And I wish I could have put 6 out of 10 on the ballot box because I absolutely passionately felt we had to respect the result. But going around the cabinet, some of those kind of moments you'll never forget. I'll never forget the rest of my life.
But do you mean he literally went around and got everyone to say how they were going to vote? Yeah,
that was on the Saturday morning. They obviously knew what people were going to do beforehand, and I had actually said to them, I'm in a bind about this because I find it really hard. On balance, partly because I was worried about all the aggro that would happen for many years, which I did happen, partly because I liked Britain leading foreign policy, and partly because genuinely out of loyalty to George Osborne, who'd put me there in the first place. But it wasn't a sycophantic loyalty, it was genuinely a sense of obligation. He felt I was a reluctant Remainer.
But it turned out you were right, all the aggro afterwards.
Oh my goodness! Well, it was even worse than I thought it would be. But it was at the Brexit Parliament was a terrible Parliament to be in.
Yeah, I spoke to Edward Timpson a couple of weeks ago, and he missed it because
he's lucky.
Left in 2015 to go back.
But it was unbearable. You go in the tea room and you just want to get a cup of tea. The tea room is like the lorry driver's cafe for MPs, as you know, and suddenly there'd be somebody would start going on about it, one side or another, and I did once say to one colleague, I said, "Can't you shut the F up? I'm just having a cup of tea. Enough now. We get it all day from the news in Parliament, everything. Just give it a break."
How did Theresa May respond to that?
It wasn't
her. We talk a lot in this whole series. Has come up a lot about the abuse that MPs have had, and in particular, actually talking about foreign affairs, situation in the Middle East has been part of that. I think you've got family in Israel.
Yes, I have, yeah.
What have you made of the last few months, and how has it been for you in your position?
It's definitely worse, without a doubt. It has been getting bad for years before the thing. I think, every day you pray there's not going to be another Joe Cox, David Amess. I think they really need to look at seriously the security of MPs, because now they say, you have an MP at a surgery, or a policeman at an MP's surgery, a police officer at an MP's surgery, but everyone knows where the MPs live. Everyone knows where the MPs go out on a Saturday, whether it's to their cafe, shopping, whatever it is, or campaigning. You can find an MP very, easily. And there are just so many people out there, so many incidents that have happened to me over the years, and which never happened in the beginning. It happens to people of all parties. I think that they need to look at it much more than they do. And I think it is coming to the time when MPs will need, I think, personal protection officers with them all the time. I know that will be a cost to the taxpayer, but I don't see any difference between being an MP or being Home Secretary, of course in rank and in cabinet, but at the end of the day, the MP is there to represent your constituency, but also in Parliament. And I think that there needs to be a personal protection officer for all MPs. I just think the way it's going. So you can, if somebody suddenly becomes violent or screams at you, is threatening, that you've got someone with you. Pressing a button, as Steve Baker did the other day, by the time a police officer comes along, it's going to be another 10 minutes. Or whatever. So it might be too late. So I think that that is the only way to deal with it. And the social media, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. It's Pandora's box. It's brilliant in a way, because we used to have 4 local newspapers in my local area, and now we have one brilliant internet paper only. But everything I have to do now, I have to get it out on social media, because otherwise people won't know. Especially Facebook is still important, contrary to myth. It can be incredibly important, especially with residence groups and neighbourhood groups and so on. So I have to get it out there. But it's brilliant in a way, but it's very dangerous as well.
In your resignation letter, you said there was a quiet respect for Rishi Sunak across the country. It's pretty quiet, isn't it? It's so quiet that most people can't hear it.
Well, I think you only hear the noises off, or I actually, of all the prime ministers, I get on very comfortably with him. He's got a work ethic. His thing was, education and work, and very much what my father taught us. I think he's hardworking. I think he's a problem solver and very decent. So I think that what people want is a prime minister to solve problems, be on top of the detail, and that's where he is. And I think even his detractors would say that. So that's why I said what I said. I'm quite loyal to him, because I think that he's a good person trying to do his best.
You quoted famously in your resignation letter Lord of the Rings, quoting Gandalf, saying, "My time is over. It is no longer my task to set things to rights, nor to help folk to do so." Who does Rishi Sunak remind you of?
Well, I thought you might ask me this, and I was very cautious about responding, but I did think about it. I would say he's probably like Faramir, because he's underrated and understated, and Faramir was, if you read, and yet achieved a lot. So if I had to think of, I know I'm going to be lampooned now on social media, no doubt, for having said this. And but if I'm not going to, if you ask me about other Tory politicians, I'm not going to compare them. But I draw a line on the Prime Minister. Anyway. Yeah.
What do you say to those in your party already sort of arguing over the direction? It seems as if part of the problem that Rishi Sunak's had since he's become Prime Minister is changing direction. He was the continuity candidate, he was the change candidate, he's the better W candidate, he's got the noises off you're talking about. They think the way to get reform voters back is to sort of bang on about immigration and rainbow lanyards. Is that the right direction for the Tory party you've been part of?
Well, I don't think that. I think that the right way is what I call compassionate conservatism, or what I originally understood as white van conservatism, or what the original concept of blue-collar conservatism, which isn't necessarily about focusing on cultural wars. I wear a Ukraine lanyard, and I love wearing it when I wear a lanyard, which because it's like wearing a badge. You like wearing badges. I like wearing badges. So what we have to resolutely focus on is the cost of living, and it's protecting the NHS, GP surgery appointments, it's affordable housing. And I think, to be fair to the government, despite all that other stuff, the focus on the economy and the cost of living has been a massive priority in terms of the NI tax cut of 900 quid, the 100 billion pounds given to help with the cost of living, energy bills. But I think we need a absolutely relentless focus on that. So if I was in the Sunday Telegraph, I wouldn't be going on about lanyards. I would be going about, this is our latest measure to help with the cost of living, or this is what we've done to help with the cost of living.
Do you think part of the problem is, particularly with those tax cuts, and it's cost an enormous amount of money, if people just stop listening, that actually Rishi Sunak could promise the moon on a stick to every voter, but the electorate collectively has just switched off?
A lot of this was said in 2015, and I had a majority of just 4,000 in 2010 after fighting it. Yeah, it was my third attempt. And I think if there was a relentless focus on some of the things I've just mentioned to you, and with a narrative, a kind of compassionate conservative narrative, you leave all the cultural stuff to J.K. Rowling and others. I'm not saying it, I don't agree with it, I admire her hugely, but focus on what the public want. And the public want us to sort out the cost of living in the economy, and know that when they ring up the doctor, they can get there and not have to wait 3 weeks. So this is not rocket science. They want an affordable house for their kids. They want to know that if they're walking home late at night, there's not going to be antisocial behaviour. They want a good school of their choice. And we are doing some of these things, but we've got to get that a story together about it, and focus on priorities, as opposed to badges or lanyards or whatever.
Okay, let me ask you some classic exit interview questions. I want you to sum up your various bosses in a word. So let's start with David Cameron. How do you sum up David Cameron in a word?
It's more than word, but Colin Firth, the Kingsman, sort of, smooth, absolutely dressed immaculately.
Is he not an assassin?
Well, he sort of organises them all.
Right, he organises the assassins.
But but absolutely pucker dressed, sort of. He's sort of like an automobile that you drive, a car that you don't hear the engine any noise. Sort of purring magnificently. But that's how I would describe Cameron.
It's the most imaginative one we've had so far, I think. Theresa May in a word.
Theresa May, I would say. I loved her just about managing speech. That was speaking to the members of my constituency, hundreds of people, thousands of people. I would say she was the right person, but for the wrong time, because she got caught in the web of Brexit. The just about managing speech shows where she could have gone had there not been Brexit. She did something for me when I thought she was an incredible Home Secretary, because for a number of reasons, but particularly we had a particular horrific domestic violence tragedy in my constituency, and she intervened directly to help me on the particular issue, and I never forget that. So although I did give her a bit of grief during her time, I actually like her and respect her, and I respect her because of what she did for my constituents, because it had to be a direct intervention against for something, but I think she's fundamentally a good person.
You still on speaking terms now?
Oh, she's very nice to me. In fact, she won't mind. I don't think she'll mind me saying that I was one of the last people to have a BlackBerry, because I love gadgets, but I love the keyboard. She had one, and she got a new one which had an Android as opposed to the old BlackBerry thing, and she asked me to show her how it worked and stuff. So I hope she doesn't mind me saying that publicly. But I don't think she's got it anymore, because they don't exist anymore.
These things move on. We move on then to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson in a word. So
I'd say great expectations, great lamentations, because the world was his. 2019, that was an incredible result. He turned the whole thing round, stopped Corbyn, which would have been terrifying, and then it all went downhill, and incredibly sad.
And of his own making, or the victim of circumstances?
I think it's a mixture of things, because had COVID not happened, who knows what he could have done. The economy would have been in a much better state, because we'd closed our deficit and cut the debt. We might have been able to spend more on levelling up and on public services and the renewal of our towns, like mine. But then COVID and the parties and the Chris Pincher thing and just Owen Patten, one thing after another. So I think it's a mixture. It's very sad because he was an incredible campaigner. He came to my hospital, people wanted to do photos with him. He was the most incredible campaigner. I thought in 2019 when we got in that it was going to be something exciting, and it's hard to understand really how it all fell apart.
Fall apart it did for Boris Johnson to be replaced by Liz Truss. So Liz Truss in a word.
So I would say to her about her, she should be more President Truman than President Trump. And what I mean by that is President Truman had a fantastic wooden thing on his desk saying the buck stops here, whereas she says the buck stops with the Economist or the deep state or whatever it is. And so she should recognise that she was responsible for what went on. The buck stops here. That's the sign that President Truman had on his desk so that everyone, whatever went on, everyone knew that he was responsible. And at the end of the day, she was the head of state. She was responsible. So that's what I would say about her.
And finally then, Rishi Sunak, you've touched on him a little bit already, but just about Rishi Sunak in a word.
What I said was underrated and understated, and a good man, hardworking, and solving very, very difficult problems that, I think that's what we need prime ministers to do.
Some classic, one or two other classic exit interview questions. Which was the part of the job you enjoyed the least?
Being there at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, because it's an insane system. I mean, if you start work at you get up at 6, you're in work by 8, 9 o'clock, and then you're voting 9, 10, 11, 12, sometimes later in the morning. I just don't get it. And voting, when you have to be there and vote 5 times on the trot or 10 times, we did 14 times, I think, or something earlier this year or last year. And why on earth you can't just go and press the button and vote those 14 times all together? I do not get it. It's such an incredible waste of time. Although you do see colleagues and it's nice to chat, but you can do that in the tea room. Ministers go into the tea room.
But you'll tell them to F off if you do that.
No, that was not a minister. It was just a colleague going on about Brexit. I couldn't take it. I'd had enough. But but that is it. That's
the late nights.
It's not so much late nights, just because how on earth you could invent a system like that? Why do you need to vote at 10 o'clock at night? I just don't get it. After you've done a day's work and people are knackered, people hang around, you don't always make the right decision.
And actually, all the technology was there because you had it during...
the technology is there.
Yeah.
So I don't even mind. People want to go in the division lobby. So go in the division lobby, but vote 5 times together rather than
again and again. Yeah. Would you... This is an interesting one. This has come up... it's probably the question that people during this series have most wrestled with. Would you recommend this job to a friend or someone you cared about?
So Parliament, I liken it to, don't get me wrong, it's been the greatest honour of my life to be there, but it's a bit like an open prison. You voluntarily check yourself into. You have electronic tags, otherwise, which are the phones, because the whips are texting you like, are you on the estate? You can leave now. Please go and vote. It's no different. It's like a category D open prison, but you voluntarily check yourself into, and then you have Stockholm syndrome because you can't get out of it. So I've finally broken that Stockholm syndrome. Would I recommend anyone to do it? It is an incredible thing, but you have to. It has changed a lot, even in the years I've been there. So you have to have the skin of a rhinoceros. And you have to learn and deal with some wonderful people, but also there's some horrible things that go on. And so you need to, and also it is quite a selfish occupation because it's all consuming. So you come back on a Thursday, then you might go out to a full council to support the councillors. Then on Friday, you're doing all day community stuff. Then you come back at night. Then Saturday, you are doing campaigning or going to a event or like a fete or whatever it might be. So you come back at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you might do something on Sunday morning, like there might be a civic service or something going on, and then in the evening you're already thinking about you might have travelled to London, or so it's quite a selfish profession. It's very all-consuming. So of course it impacts on your friends, your family, and so on. Having said that, it is still a wonderful thing to do. So I don't want to be entirely negative. When you're part of history as it's being made, you vote on really important things like, should your country go to war? The best speech I've ever seen in Parliament was from Hilary Benn about Syria. It was incredible. I was actually on the front, not the front bench, but the other bit of the front bench, which is non-ministers. It was incredible speech. And there were great moments like that you never forget. I never forget, as I say, the discussion in Cabinet about referendum, all the work I've done on apprenticeships and skills that I would never have been able to do to change policy forever with select committees. So I've been very lucky to do it, but it's no longer my task to set things right.
So go on, that's the last question. And what will you do next?
I want to work in education and skills because I was lucky to be appointed Apprentice Minister twice, so skills, actually higher education. My first ever speech in the House of Commons was about apprenticeships because I'd met these kids from very disadvantaged backgrounds when I was a candidate who were desperate to do them. They weren't available. So I decided that I would major on it if I got in. And so that's been the love. That's been the only, apart from obviously being Deputy Chairman, which was a great job, but the only job that I really wanted in government, and because you're a cynic, I know you might find it hard to believe, but they know this, was to do some education and skills. I was really lucky to do it. I was very sad to go. I didn't want to resign, but because I stepped down as MP, I just felt that I needed the time and the space to start thinking about new life as well. But that has been really what's motivated me. So I hope to do something in that area.
Well, best of luck with it all. Really appreciate your time today. Robert Halfon, thank you for joining us for your exit interview.
Thank you.